Um, okay, welcome everyone, and especially welcome to Dee, who's going to be leading the workshop. Dee is a strategic consultant with extensive experience on Pan-African and global projects. She holds a Bachelor of Journalism from Rhodes University and a Master's in Anthropology, and hopefully soon she will be graduating with her PhD in December. So well done for completing your PhD.
Thank you.
Dee has a background in publishing, advertising, marketing, and in consumer insights. Dee, over to you. Would you like to say a little bit more?
Thanks. So I'm gonna share my screen. And the reason for this is that most of the presentation I've developed as an online sort of presentation, as it were. And it got finished rather late last night. So I've put my email address up there, and I ask if you could just write the email address down. And if anybody would like a copy of this presentation, which essentially takes you step by step through the workshop, please just email me and I will Dropbox it to you, because it is 400 slides long. So it was a very interesting exercise, taking essentially what is tangible materials, maps, cards, and so on, and then turning it into an online experience. So you're all guinea pigs. I've been running this workshop for, what is it now, 5 years around the world. And usually with tangible material and in person. This is my first online experiment, which I'm hoping works. I'm also going to try and make it as interactive as possible. Essentially what we're all going to do is, can everyone hear me? Because I see, okay, sorry, there was a little bit of a flutter with my internet. All you need for this workshop is just a notepad and a pen. Because what we're going to do for this workshop is we're going to develop a child protection strategy for each of our individual communities. So whilst I'm chatting and introducing everyone and everything, perhaps just have a little think about what community you would like to develop that child protection strategy for. So it might be a community that you live in. It might be a community that you go and visit when you go and see your family, or where you grew up. It might be a community that you're involved in with your research and your field site. And it could just also be a community that, you know, you engage with regularly because you support them, you know, with various charity endeavors and so on. So have a little think about which community you would like to engage with. And as I say, sometimes the best is just your personal community and where you are at the moment. So just a little bit more insight into my background, just so that you understand where this material comes from. So I was actually a business and brand consultant for many years, around 15 years actually. And I worked on change management programs for the likes of MTN, and where we turned the world yellow, and ABSA when we merged all the banks together, and all sorts of different big organizational change management programs. And so I guess my background was in change management, and that really, well, branding, marketing, business consulting, and brand and change management. So that's why you'll see sometimes I make reference to sort of marketing terms or business terms, and it's because that's, I guess, where I really started. But in about 2010, I changed my career completely. I got involved in the child protection community for various reasons. And in 2013, I went back to university, and Nawazi very kindly offered to be my supervisor for my master's dissertation, which looked at child abandonment in South Africa in the context of African ancestral beliefs. So trying to understand why there's such a challenge around child abandonment and, in fact, adoption in South Africa. And that led me into spending an enormous amount of time, 4 years in the, well, I'd already spent a number of years in various communities around South Africa, mostly communities who, you know, are disadvantaged, who live below the poverty line. And what I realized was the very high level of child protection challenges that we experience in South Africa, but also around the world and in sub-Saharan Africa. So I was approached. I developed an engagement program around crisis pregnancy, and a community engagement program around crisis pregnancy and child abandonment and adoption. And unbeknownst to me, this program was actually being used up through Africa, as far as Ethiopia, as I understand it, around actually dealing with child protection issues. And I was then approached by the Swedish Foundation for Children Without Parental Care. And they asked me if I could take the engagement program that I developed and develop it into a more holistic program that looks at child protection, and specifically child abuse, child neglect, and child exploitation. So that the result was Courage, and I'm going to introduce you to Courage now, but just so that you understand sort of where I come from. As I say, marketing and branding was important to me. So I'm hoping that these are, it's also a good looking campaign, not just or program, not just good in terms of content. So just to start, obviously you've got my email address there, and also just to take note of the website. All of the material that I'm going to take you through today is actually available online at that website. You just go to Toolkit and you can download absolutely any of the material. You'll just have to print it out. And if you want me to get you a toolkit, I'll happily get you a toolkit. I just charge you cost price for the printing. And I'll show you some of that material as we go through it. So it's, yeah, hopefully extremely accessible, but obviously welcome any input in terms of if you can't access something. And if you do in fact work for a charity or a good cause, I will also try and sponsor that training material for you, because that's really my mission in life, is to get this out to as many people as possible. So, for some reason, there we go. So step one is, what is courage? And as I mentioned, as we go through, we're going to do a little bit of interactive stuff. I'm just going to start with a quick introduction and just talk to the philosophy of the program. And then once we've done that, I'll just get into the detail of the different exercises that we need to go through to try and develop a child protection program for the children in our communities that we're focused on. So what is Courage? Well, it's a child protection and community empowerment community program. And it really tries to be as interactive as possible. And the vision that very much drives the sort of the Courage philosophy is that we believe that it's everyone's responsibility to take care of the children in our various communities. But often the challenges seem too great and the solutions too complex to actually enact real change or make a difference in our communities. So the vision for Courage is to really try and build very strong communities around the world that put our rights and needs of our children first, and that try and solve these problems within the context of a community. I think if you look at the numbers, governments around the world are reducing spending on social development everywhere. And you see it in the communities in South Africa. You know, everyone's response is, oh, there's big problems here. We're just going to wait for social development to come and solve them. And the problem is that social development don't have the resources and actually aren't able to come and solve those problems. So this program is really about saying, what can we do as community members to actually identify these problems, think differently about these problems, and then solve these problems within the context of our communities and with like-minded individuals in our communities. And we do this by what I call empowered care, and I'll speak to the whole concept of disempowerment versus empowerment, which was really the whole idea behind this talk in a second. But the kinds of places where I run these workshops and where other people run these workshops are places like in hospitals with doctors and nurses, in children's homes with carers, and in fact children, in religious, with a lot of religious institutions who do ministering and outreach work in their communities, within the child protection community, so the social workers and the child protection organizations and the baby homes and children's homes and so on, with police officers who are engaging on a number of these child protection issues at a very tangible and real level in their communities. And then I do a lot of work in schools, so working with children and working with teachers, helping them to try and identify what their child protection challenges are and then try and address them. This is sort of a very brief introduction as to where Courage is being used around the world. I've done a lot of work on it in sort of sub-Saharan Africa, and I've then done a little bit of work in the UK and obviously in Sweden, but other people have taken it to South America. In fact, around a whole bunch of natural disasters, they used Courage to train up auxiliary social workers. There's a particular lady in North America who uses it around adoption and training and understanding of adoption. I think one of my most, in India, it's used around child trafficking predominantly. But one of my favorite experiences was in fact getting a phone call from the Seychelles, from the children's, essentially the organization that runs all social development for children in the Seychelles. And they literally said, we're an island in the Indian Ocean and we need courage. And it was a very heartwarming experience. I'll show you a few pictures as we go through this program. But what's amazing is that they've actually taken courage and turned it into how they do social development in the Seychelles, and they've been running it successfully for the past 4 years, just reinventing it and looking at different aspects that they're trying to deal with, which is really exciting. And I think another really important point to make is the inspiration for this toolkit. I'm going to take you through these sort of 8 different exercises, but the inspiration for it is really Lego. And what I mean by that is a number of us are engaging in communities, we're doing different things. And really what we want courage to be is a way to enhance the things you're doing. So you might engage with a group of people and you only need 2 of the exercises. And the program is designed to literally enable you to do that. You might need a visioning exercise and a process showing you how to safeguard children. And you would just take those 2 pieces and implement it into the work that you're doing. So I always like to say courage is a little bit like an ingredient brand, where we're like the Intel inside. You've got all of the processing that you're doing, but we try and enhance your child protection capacity in each of these areas. So I just wanted to talk a little bit to the title of the workshop, which was Exhale Disempowerment and Inhale Empowering, or Exhale Challenges and Inhale Empowering Solutions. And this is one of those examples where I use a marketing reference. When I was approached to do this program and to do the research, which took about a year, and I was really just looking at best practice, I really had to understand what was happening in the world around child protection. And so I used an old marketing kind of approach, which is segmentation, market segmentation. And I really just asked the question, who are these children that we're talking about? Who are the perpetrators who are, sort of doing things to the children? And who are the people who are actually protecting the children, and what kind of programs are they offering? I also wanted to understand what are all the child protection challenges that exist out there in the world. What's really interesting is when you talk to people about child protection, they often have solutions which are very focused on 1 or 2 key things. So they might have a nutrition solution, or they might have an HIV solution, or they might have an abuse solution for a certain age group of children. But no one's actually saying, well, what happens if we put the child at the center of what we're trying to do, and then we build a child protection solution around them, which is very much, I guess, a marketing approach. Put the customer in the center and then build the solution around them. And that's very much what I wanted to do. So you might have a child, for instance, who was abandoned. This is a typical South African situation. You have a child who's been abandoned. They might not necessarily make it into the child protection system, so they are then taken care of by various community members, but they have very little instability. They're often then trafficked, often into the sex industry or into other spaces. They, have never eaten a decent meal in their life. They probably haven't been to school. They might be HIV positive. And so now how do we deal with that child? How do we put that child at the center of our world and then build a solution around them, because they need everything. And that's really what I was trying to understand by doing this exercise and developing these various tools for courage. So that talks to also the interventions. How are we engaging with them? Why are these challenges happening? When you ask perpetrators, why are you abusing, neglecting, or exploiting children? What are the reasons they give? Because often our solutions, especially around changing behavior, sit in the why. When is it happening? From a life stage point of view, what kinds of things are happening when a child is born or in utero, versus say what's happening when they are slightly older and going to school, versus once they're slightly older than that and they are engaging in risky behavior because they're now teenagers, or maybe got involved in gangs and so on. And then finally, where is this occurring? So, when we are engaged in communities, and you'll see that the whole program is designed around saying, how do I relate what's happening in this program to what's happening in my community? So what's the stuff that's actually happening in at my home versus what stuff is happening at my school versus what's happening just in the general community. And if we understand all of these different pieces, then we can actually start to build that solution around the child. So that's kind of where we really can. I see that somebody's lost sound. Can you hear me?
Sorry, it's fine. Sorry, Dee. I think it's just my internet connection went unstable. I wasn't sure if it was mine or yours, so I was just checking.
Oh, no problem. Okay. Okay, no worries. Please, as we go, if I'm going too fast, because I kind of present like a train, out of control train on a track, please feel free to ask questions or slow me down if there's anything that's not making sense to you. But importantly, you're not expected to read everything on these slides, which is why I'll happily send the presentation to you, or you can download it from the website in a day or so. It's more just to illustrate what's going on. So this is one of those slides which you definitely are not supposed to read, but I want to explain to you conceptually what I was trying to do here. And this is talking to that whole idea of exhaling challenges and inhaling empowered solutions. When I went through the process of asking why do you abuse, neglect, or exploit children or their mothers or their fathers and so on, vulnerable individuals connected to children, I was given a number of different reasons. And like all good consultants, I try to get all those reasons onto one page and group them together. And what was absolutely fascinating was that 7 key areas, I almost call them the 7 deadly sins of child protection, emerged. And you can see those areas on the left-hand side of your screen. So a lot of the challenges I summarized under what I called violence and inequality. So just the general kind of violence that happens in poor communities where people don't have access to resources and so on. The next area up was issues around isolation and exploitation. So a lot of children are exploited because they are not connected to families or communities, and therefore people take advantage of them. The next level was around low self-esteem. So, making decisions to join gangs, to drink alcohol, to take drugs and so on, because they feel very bad about themselves and who they are. The next area up is just around just a complete lack of forgiveness for the world. So they've been abused, they are angry, and that then just spills, this abuse and hate and anger just spills out into the world. There's an area around apathy and addiction, which is all around, I don't know and I don't care. There's no point, why should I? And then obviously linked to a lot of issues around addiction, drug and alcohol addiction, and various other forms of addiction, which kind of, when you lack that focus and direction, you're apathetic, you tend to fall into that space, or it does happen. Then there's an area around ignorance and corruption and just a complete lack of knowledge. And finally, there was an area about neglect and just non-delivery. So, not being able to do things because you have absolutely no resources. And it was really interesting because all these challenges were about disempowerment, and they were all about feeling disempowered, but there were very distinct themes around that disempowerment, and that was represented by these areas on the left. And what was really interesting at the time was that I'd worked in change management, as I mentioned, for quite some time. And I'd done an enormous amount of research in trying to understand what empowers individuals within organizations, or just individuals generally. And I'd literally done this process over a number of years. And what I identified was that there were these 7 different areas of personal empowerment, ways that you can empower people and organizations, and in fact, communities. And they are things like values and beliefs. So the opposite of violence and inequality is about having values and believing in something. The opposite of isolation and lack of community connection is about partnership and collaboration. Obviously, low self-esteem is high self-esteem. Instead of having hate and abuse and lack of forgiveness, it's about building love and harmony. Instead of being apathetic and having sort of no focus and direction in life, you want a vision and purpose. Instead of a lack of knowledge and ignorance, you want knowledge and insight. And instead of action and inaction and lack of service delivery and neglect, you want to be present and you want to be doing things. So this was actually a program that I'd been running for a number of years in the sort of individual and corporate space. And what was fascinating was all of those areas of disempowerment were equally matched by these areas of empowerment. And that was a real kind of insight for me, because I realized I now had a tool to actually inhale and to drive empowerment in these communities that related directly to the kinds of challenges that they were seeing every single day and that would make sense for them. And what I loved about this, I mean, I'd actually developed these pictures when I did the original program, because I have a friend who has a picture-based training company. And yeah, we had developed these pictures. So then when I got into the disempowerment space, it just made sense to turn this into a picture-based program. And what's great about that is I've literally run this program everywhere from, you know, kind of corporate offices in Sandton all the way through to under a tree in Kala in the Eastern Cape, or you know, Limpopo, and with a high degree of success, because the whole program is literally pictures. So as long as your facilitator can understand what the pictures mean, they can facilitate and discuss the various issues happening. And the one I always think about is the one at the top, which is about love and harmony. We created this picture and I showed it to my son, who was about 5 or 6 at the time. And he said, I said, "What do you think's happening here, my boy?" And he said, "It's Valentine's Day for everyone." And I thought that was really appropriate. Imagine if every day was Valentine's Day. That would be wonderful, and we all loved each other. So that was kind of the philosophy that I knew was going to drive this program. And I think this got sent to all of you. It's supposed to be blown up to, I think it's A2 size, so 4 times A4. And you can download it. It doesn't have to be quite that big. A3 actually works fine. It's a little bit smaller at A4. But I had developed, when I first got this program going, I developed this really thick Train the Trainer manual, which talked about what you need to do, what the outcome should be, and hugely detailed. I think it was about, you know, 120 pages long or whatever. And nobody looked at it. So I decided that the solution would be to create a Train the Trainer poster that literally folds up and that you can access really easily. So this is the trainer's manual. It's as big as it gets, and it's sort of, you can download it and print it, or you can order them from me. They're very cheap. And but the point is, it takes you through the philosophy, which is in the middle, an introduction to the program, which runs the 4 blocks that run across the top. And then if you go sort of from left to right across the top, you then come down and you'll see number 5 is creating a vision. And that's where we actually start with practical exercises, which we're going to get to in a minute. So I'm just going to quickly take you across those 4 squares at the top, just individually, and just talk to the thinking behind courage. So firstly, obviously, that it's really about building strong communities. And it's why is that so important? Well, so first of all, it's about building strong communities. That's our vision. But in terms of what is child protection, I actually use the definition that's defined in our Children's Act, which is about the prevention and responding to violence, exploitation, and abuse against children. So you can start to see some of the pictures that we developed to try and explain these. There's a little baby who's been neglected and is not being fed and not being cared for. There's an example of domestic abuse. There's a child who's been abandoned by a mother who's in a very awful situation and obviously feels like this is her only solution. And then there's some little children on the right there who are being forced to into child labor. So just an example of some of the challenges that we face. In the world of child protection, there are 3 kinds of people. There is always a child protection officer, or somebody who is looking after the child. So it doesn't have to be an officer, it can just be an adult in the community or other children, older children in the community. There's a child, and then there's a perpetrator. And those, I'm just going to talk to a little bit about these 3 individuals as we talk about moving from disempowered to empowered child protection. So, sorry, I'm going into detail here, and I mustn't. I want to quickly just show you the different things we're going to do over the next hour and a half, and then we'll go into detail on each of them. So the next thing we'll look at is drivers of community empowerment. We're then going to create a vision for our children. We're going to identify our child protection challenges. We're going to prioritize those understand and prioritize those child protection challenges. We're going to try and think about how to move from those disempowered drivers of the child protection challenges to empowered drivers, and how that changes our thinking in that world. I'm going to then take you through a very sort of specific step-by-step process of what do you do if you've seen a child who's been abused or neglected or exploited. We're going to look at how we identify partners in our community. We're going to look at If we've got rights, then what are our responsibilities, and how does that relate to the values that will drive change behavior? And then we're going to turn it into an action plan. So that's kind of a very brief overview of the different tools or program exercises that we're going to do today. And that's sort of, as I say, you can download this little picture and print it out for future. At this stage, are there any queries or any questions? Because I'm now going to start getting into the workshopping component. Any queries? Right, it's silent, so feel free to just put it on the chat, and if you have got any questions, but let's dive right into it. So first of all, let's just talk about what is child protection. Well, we've talked about it being the preventing and responding to the violence, exploitation and abuse of children. Why is it so important? Well, if we don't start dealing with these issues when children are much younger, we start seeing all sorts of challenges that come out of not dealing with child protection. And I've actually had economists look at this and look at how it impacts on just the well-being of society at every level. We start seeing things like high levels of depression, anxiety, suicide, learning challenges, substance abuse, risky sexual behavior, developmental challenges, post-traumatic stress disorder, poor self-regulation, and just the whole idea that violence often begets more violence. So it's critical that we start dealing with these issues now when children are small and still incredibly resilient and open to change, which they absolutely are. So as I mentioned, there's three kinds of people involved in the child protection process. There's usually the person who's doing a bit of protecting or helping and empowering. There's the child, and there's the perpetrator. So in terms of who's the child protection officer, we're looking at people like teachers, police officers, social workers, government officials, doctors and nurses, and just sort of, I guess, community, gorgors in the community are looking after the children in general and keeping an eye on them. In terms of the child, you know, there's obviously children who are you know, it's young children, it's from babies all the way through to 18 years of age. And perpetrators, obviously people who enact sort of violence, abuse and exploitation against children. And these can be those, you know, the dreadful child traffickers who we have a particular view on, or abusing adults or parents, but it can also be a desperate mother who has absolutely no idea what to do and has absolutely no support. So, you know, it's not always, you know, you're not always going to spy this person from a mile off. In fact, often we don't. And the problem is with these three kinds of people is that they tend to move into this disempowered space, that whole kind of breathing out and kind of feeling breathless and disempowered. So in this space, your child protection officer becomes the rescuer, your child becomes a victim, and your perpetrator becomes a persecutor, someone who actually persecutes others. And the problem with going into this sort of out of breath, disempowered space is that it tends to be a cycle. Stephen Cartman talked about this as a drama cycle. So what tends to happen is your rescuer becomes the victim, becomes the persecutor, becomes the rescuer, and so on. I mean, how often do we see children or people who've experienced abuse themselves then enacting abuse on others? And really what we need to do is to start making empowered choices. So the child protection officer needs to become an enabler, the child a survivor or thriver, and the perpetrator an accountable person. So what that looks like is the rescuer as a kind of the disempowered space of the child protection officer in the rescuer position is saying things like, oh, I feel so sorry for this child needs me, I feel so guilty, I should have done more, I'm going to solve all these problems for the child. Where they should be saying things like, as an enabler, this is not acceptable, absolutely, but what are the choices available for this child? What needs to change? And how can I empower different behaviors, different actions? The child as victim is saying things like, I'm trapped and I'm suffering, I don't know what to do, there's nothing I can do, I have no choices. Where to try and empower them is to say things like, you know, what is happening to me is not right, I need to do something about this. What choices do I have? Who can help me and what can I do? And I mean, obviously I'm not talking about, you know, abandoned babies here, but I am talking about their mothers who are part of that sort of vulnerable dyad, who can then reach out to try and find a solution. And finally, the persecutor, this child doesn't matter, this child is not a person, it's a thing. It's not my fault. In fact, it's the child's fault. She was wearing sexy clothing and therefore I thought she was older than she was, you know, those sorts of thoughts. And, you know, what about my struggles? What about me? To, you know, what I've done is wrong. This could be my child. It could be my sister, my brother, my mother. I must take responsibility for my actions. And what can I do to actually make up for what I've done and to solve this? So how do we get people from moving into that disempowered space and the breathing out to the breathing in and moving into the empowered space of actually saying, well, we can solve this problem together. So this is kind of a little bit of theory around personal and community empowerment. And it's really to say that there are a number of drivers of personal and community empowerment. And I'm going to quickly take you through these. So what do we mean by empowerment? Dictionary definition is a good place to start. It's about authority or power, but most importantly, it's about becoming more stronger and confident in controlling one's life and claiming one's rights and gaining agency. So how do we empower ourselves and our communities? And it really is just 3 very simple little steps. The first thing is we need to believe that something is possible. The second thing is we need to build some level of self-awareness. I'm going to go into detail in each of these. And the third is we need to be focusing on abundance rather than scarcity. So believing in possibility is quite simply, you know, do you have a dream? Do you have a vision of what you want to achieve? And are you following this dream with passion? Self-awareness is, do you know who you are, what you believe in, what you're good at, where you need help? Those are the things that build self-awareness. And then finally, abundance is, are you the kind of person who doesn't believe that there's enough for everyone in the world? So a scarcity mindset. Or do you believe that actually there's more than enough in this world for everyone? And really it's just about allocation of resources, as it were. So how do we do this? Well, interestingly, there are 3 things you can do to create possibility. The first is to obviously have a vision and purpose. This is about things like having focus and direction, giving yourself choices or having choices. It's often linked to societal leadership, self-expression, freedom, and innovation. You have to have knowledge and insight. You know, how can I learn? How can I answer questions? How can I encourage new ways of thinking and diversity of thoughts and ideas and rights? Search for the truth, seek transparency, monitor and evaluate what's going on, and be open to new ideas. And finally, I need to build presence and action. So what do I need to do? This little guy here, he's planting a seed so that he can build a tree for the future. So this is about presence and action. It's about planning. It's about future focus, service delivery, believing in possibility, access, and sustainability. On the awareness side, how do I build self-awareness? Well, this is the other side of that little picture I showed you earlier. We need to have values and beliefs, provide for the basics, know right from wrong, equality, societal leadership again. You know, these are how we build our values and beliefs. The next is partnership and collaboration. How do we share those values with others? How do we build partnerships with mutual trust and respect, good communication, strong families, extended family support, and government partnership? And finally, self-esteem and self-worth. Well, that's about having a strong personal identity, caring for others as well as yourself, personal achievement, being able to make decisions, and taking responsibility for our world. And then how do we be abundant? Well, we need to build love. And love is about saying, instead of choosing violence to solve problems, we want to choose love to solve problems. We want to build loving families and communities. We want to build empathy, peace, and care and support. So doing things to pull people together as opposed to break people apart. So here is my little picture again. And if you think about it, when we're all born unconsciously empowered. We all start in the space of, I can do anything, I can be anything. And what tends to happen is a whole bunch of people tell you, actually, no, you can't do anything. You can't be anything because of your race, because of your religion, because of your age, because of you were born in a particular place, because of a whole bunch of different reasons, because you're a girl versus a boy or anything else in between. We then move down this sort of belief and possibility to being, to going from unconsciously empowered to unconsciously disempowered. What's quite interesting is that the people who tend to drive those unconsciously disempowered individuals are the consciously empowered. So they've got high levels of self-awareness, they're good at stuff, they know who they are, but their whole belief is, there's a pie, it's this big, here's my slice. If I want more, I'll have to take it away from you. And so that really leaves us to our last space, which is about being the difference between scarcity and abundance and being consciously empowered. What builds that whole sort of self-awareness, the high self-esteem, partnership, and values. What builds our sort of belief in possibility? It's things like action, knowledge, and vision. And what builds our belief in possibility is the belief in love and care and empathy. So that kind of explains that last little picture, which is the last square on that top level, talking to what courage is about. And those are how they relate to those drivers I spoke to you about beforehand. So building strong communities powered by courage. Right, you're going to see these little slides in between, and that means that we're going to now get into another exercise. So that was just the introduction. Now I want to talk to actually, let's get going. So when I start a workshop, I tend to ask people to, well, I ask people to develop a vision, and I do that in quite an interesting way. So right at the start, if you just want to grab your little notepad and pen and just do a line down the middle, and on the left-hand side, I just want you to just note a few words down about why do we have children? What is the purpose of children in our community, in our families, in our lives? Just jot down a few little points around in the left-hand column about why do you think we have children? What is their role in our community? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that. In fact, whilst you're doing that, for each of these exercises, I do offer some useful courage tools. So we have various cards that you can use. There's a pack of empowerment cards, and they have cards that talk to how children should be growing up and what their rights are. So that's quite a good stimulus, that's quite good stimulus for trying to get people to think about, you know, children and what should be happening to them. There's also a big poster, a child needs and rights poster. There will be a movie soon enough, and then of course there's this presentation, which is quite new, that you can just have a look at to think about children's rights and needs, and what kind of world we want to create for them, a vision for them. So I'm hoping you guys have written a few points down, and I was going to say, if you want to share your views on things like why do we have children and what's their purpose in life, perhaps just type them into the chat box, and then we can sort of see what everybody's saying around these things. Or you can just write it on your piece of paper and you can just show us what you've written. That's another way, just to share your thinking. So I'm hoping you've had a little chance to think about why we have children. This is, I'm not going to go into the slide, we've been through it already, but this is really talking to that first point of developing a vision and what is a vision. Another point to note is that really good visions are usually leader initiated. So often in the community context, they are the visions driven by the community. They're often positive and inspiring. We want to try and get people to really make step changes in terms of the care and protection of our children. They're hopefully shared and supported by everybody within your community. And they're also quite comprehensive and detailed. So you've sat down and you've thought through, oh, I see, yay, we've got a, whoopsie, we've got somebody sharing their perspective. Reproductive futurism, thanks Margie. Belief in and desire for creating better futures for our children, that's wonderful. So yeah, and sort of the last point is they're comprehensive and detailed. So, you know, when we talk about reproductive futurism, Margie's then gone on to explain what she means by that, so that people really understand what we're trying to achieve with children. Right, I'm now. So the questions we ask is, what is the role of children in our community? And this is kind of how we should answer. On the left-hand side, the role of children. And then the second part of the question, once we've written what is the role of children, is what kind of world do we want to create for them? Now, before you write this down, and I can see that a lot of you have already started going there, is, you know, on the left is thinking about what should be happening to children, but on the right is saying, what do we want to actually create for them? So it's that future focused vision. And to give you some stimulus around that, I just want to share a few examples of what some of the stuff is that's happened in some of the workshops that I've run. So some of the great things that I've been told around children, and I'm seeing there's expectations to propagate one's genes. These are all fantastic. And these are some of the ones that have come out in the workshops that I've run with literally thousands of people over the last 5 years, is things like to be an expression of our love as a couple and a family, to build and grow our families and communities, to build future generations, and to create possibilities and new ideas. And what's really amazing is that if they have a positive role, the children are empowered. So you start to see things like care and love and empathy and family and community building and love, learning and education and innovation and growth. However, often I run this workshop and that's not the answers that I'm given. So I often, when I say, why do we have children? What is their purpose? Obviously, people are usually quite shocked. I've even asked this question. And as we start having a conversation about it, I start to get answers like, well, they were kind of a mistake. I didn't plan for them. Or I had children because my culture expects it of me. Or, and this happened quite a lot. I remember in a workshop in Zambia, and I literally had the Ministry for Children and various individuals, all, from the police and social work and so on, all designed around looking after children. And they were literally saying, well, they're a great source of labor. And they weren't meaning it in a bad way. But obviously that's problematic. So they're a good source of labor. And then obviously one we hear a lot of in South Africa, which is they're a good retirement plan. And what I try and explain to people is that it's a little bit like when you walk into an organization. You walk into an organization and you say, what are you guys supposed to be doing here? And, the ones that are clear and say, well, this is what we're trying to achieve, they're incredibly stable and they have focus and direction. When you walk into those same organizations and you say, what are you guys trying to do here? And they're literally just putting out fires, there's huge instability in the organization and they're all over the place. And it's not dissimilar with a child. If you think about it, if you start saying things like, well, you were a mistake, and this is not so much writing visions, this is what children hear every day. We didn't plan for you. You're only here because my culture says I have to have children, go and do all this work. If you don't help, you're not worthwhile to this family. And you're going to be a great retirement plan for me. And that starts where you start to see these challenges emerge, like abuse and neglect, harmful cultural practices, child labor and exploitation, and obviously child marriage, which is sadly a growing problem in South Africa. Obviously there are other parts of the world where it's a huge problem. But I actually did a workshop last week for sort of the whole Kashmir region, and child marriage is a massive challenge in that space, in the Muslim community in that space. So now we're going to get onto the other side. So on the one side, we've talked about what is the role of our children, or what is the role of children. Now I want us to talk to what kind of world do we want to create for them? So this is kind of shifting your brain into, so what do we want to do here? How do we want to create a different kind of world for them? And to give you a little bit of stimulus for that, there, as I say, are a number of cards. This is the poster. So I'm grabbing the poster. But just to show you, so normally I'm running these workshops with big PVC posters, and I just wanted to sort of give you an indication of what this might look like. I'm going to now show it to you on the screen. Yeah, okay, so I'm just looking at some of the points, just for at least we're just talking about, the kind of traditional perspective, labor, retirement, etc. Make sure I've read that correctly. Yeah. So now we want to say, well, what do we want to create for these children? And just to give you a little bit of stimulus before you actually write down on the right-hand side what kind of world we want to create for them, I just want to show you some of the things that we need to consider. So the first thing that we need to consider is that children have rights. And I know this is quite contentious. I know rights are quite contentious around the world, but it's always a balancing act. So to develop this particular program, I looked at all the rights documents that were really relevant in the context of South Africa, even though this is a global sort of program. South Africa's Constitution and Children's Act is world-class and leading. So it's one of the most recent ones ever written. So it's really useful as kind of a world-class standard. And for that, I looked at obviously the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of the Child, UNICEF's actual rights and needs of the child. The African Union also has a document on the rights of children, and obviously we have our own South African Constitution and Children's Act. And really, what I tried to do, again, as a good consultant, is summarize all of what they said into really simple pictures, and really look at a world where the children's rights are met versus a world where the children's rights aren't met. So I've then broken it up into sort of rights to live, So what are the rights that children need to actually be able to just live, take a breath and move forward? And in that space, it's things like rights for security, health, name and registration and identity, legal protection, you know, special needs support, versus a space where those rights aren't met. Things like issues like child trafficking, sexual abuse, drug and alcohol abuse, child abuse, neglect, etc. The rights that children need to love. So those are things like they have rights to family, to honor, respect and dignity, parental care and love and privacy, versus where you have no rights to love. So things like harmful cultural practices, armed conflict, where there's no care, where there's discrimination at every level, and children are isolated, they're refugees and they have no support. At the next level up, we've got rights to learn. So things like education and community participation and leisure and recreation and freedom of thought and expression and so on, cultural roots and justice, versus having no place to play, no education, no development, no justice. And finally, rights to leave a legacy. So to live a full and happy life, to have a unique identity, to belong to a community, to have various forms of development and moral development, versus having an unhappy life and no belonging or identity, being isolated and ignored. So this is, I guess, really a summary of all the different rights pulled together and saying, in most rights documents are written as, this is what should be happening versus this is what shouldn't be happening. And that's how I've tried to position it. So children have rights and they also have needs. So children grow up, and as they grow up, they have different needs. I'm not going to go into detail on this. There's actually a whole presentation on how children grow up and what their physical, emotional, intellectual needs are at every stage of engagement. But very briefly, just to show you what the material looks like that you can engage with, it just illustrates different stages of child development. So in utero, from 0 to 40 weeks, it's a time of growth and care. We should be looking after the mother as opposed to isolating the mother and shaming her for being pregnant, and she should be eating well and not drinking alcohol and taking drugs. I'm not going to go through all of them in detail like that. In the first year, it's about love and routine. In the second year, it's about personality and first steps and words. When they become a toddler, it's about a stage of independence, observing and imitating the family around them. You know, they start growing teeth, so dental care becomes important. And for each of these, you'll notice I've also given how much they should more or less be weighing and how much they should be sleeping. From 4 to 5 years, a time of planning and making friends, school projects and project solving, problem solving. From 9 to 11, it's about accomplishment and friendship. And as they become teenagers, we start getting into puberty and hormones and early adulthood and risky behavior like smoking cigarettes and risky sexual behavior and so on. And so it's also a time when we should be talking to them about birth control and so on. So there's a whole presentation on courageous parenting, which I'm not going to go through today, but it's the kind of thing that you could use to talk to, you know, one of those toolkit elements that you could use to talk to parents about what makes good parents and what we should be thinking about. So at this point, what you should have is these two columns. And on the one side, you've said, well, why do we have children? And on the other side, I want you to just spend a few minutes just thinking about what kind of world do we want to create for them based on what I've said now. So feel free to type these visions up into that chat room. It's great to see, and we're actually going to save all of these. Charlotte's going to save all of these sort of responses. Courage is a learning process, and so anything you want to add to or that is unclear, or ideas that you've got around creating a vision for children, please add them to the chat session. So take a few minutes and just write down what your vision is for children in the community you've chosen. And whilst you're doing this, I just want to quickly show you a couple of pictures of what this exercise looks like in other spaces. So this was actually the Seychelles example that I spoke to previously. And what was amazing was that this started with the children's department within the Seychelles, but it then actually got expanded into the entire Seychelles. They ran it in the national newspaper, and they ran a program saying, let's develop a vision as a society for how we want children in the Seychelles, the kind of world we want to create for children in the Seychelles. So, you know, this is what the output from the workshop initially looked like, but as I say, it got taken into a program that literally moved across the entire Seychelles community. This is an exercise that I ran with children, and instead of getting them to actually create a vision for themselves, I asked them to design their perfect community, what they think their perfect community would look like. So if people are unable to write, it's also possible to act out their vision of the kind of world they'd like to create, or, as I say, draw pictures. I think the one that was most devastating, I included this particular picture because what was most devastating was they spent an enormous amount talking about the fact that there would be a safe place to go to the toilet. Which really, this was actually a workshop run with children in the inner city in Hillbrow. And, you know, one of their biggest concerns was that they just don't have a safe place in their community to go to the loo, which is obviously heartbreaking. Right, I'm trying to see if anyone's added any more. I'm going to keep going, but I'm hoping you've made a start at your child protection vision. I'm just looking at the time and where I'm supposed to be, and we're not doing too badly. We got to catch up a little bit of time, but in terms of what we got to get through. But the important thing is in any of these workshops is just start with a vision, start with where you want to end up, because that immediately buoys people up and gets them thinking about the future, despite having to deal with often really very distressing child protection challenges that they're often like seeing and engaging with in their communities. So do try and start on a very sort of positive note. Right, so, oh, sorry, I'm going to flick through this. This is the positive parenting presentation, which you're welcome to go through. And each of these slides has got an enormous amount of detail in the back of them and will be turned into a video. I also talk about negative and positive parenting, just in terms of discipline, because often that's a challenge, just trying to talk to parents about how do you discipline your child or create discipline in your home without abusing your child and smacking them and things like that. Right, so we've created a vision for what we want our children to, the kind of world we want our children to live in moving forward. But now we need to get back into what's actually happening. What are the challenges that are happening? And for this exercise, we use our Big Courage community map. So again, I'm going to quickly grab it from the floor here. But it literally is this enormous plastic PVC map. And you'll see that this one's actually used so that you can see people have actually put stickers all over them. And let me just, so for this exercise, you can use the Courage map with stickers, or you can use buttons. Taking the stickers off these maps after every workshop does become a bit of a mission. You can watch a video, which will be done in the near future, or you can take them through this presentation, which will introduce them to the map on the screen in front of them or on a projector. And I guess the sort of the questions that we're asking is, what we're really trying to get people to do here is just say, what are some of the challenges you've seen in your community? And this is a really tough question to ask people, because we're often hesitant to actually say, oh, you know, we know that there's corporal punishment happening in the local school, or, you know, there's somebody who's, you know, somebody who we know who's actually abusing children, you know, when they, I don't know, you know, go to a particular children's group or whatever. So what's quite interesting is when you put this map in front of people, for some reason, it takes them a step away from that very personal aspect of saying, this is happening in my community. And you're just asking them to stick stickers down. And really what this map is about, this is actually a very high resolution picture. So if you are using if you've got a screen that you can zoom into, you can actually, I'll see if I can do it here. You can actually zoom into various challenges and you can navigate around the map and actually look in detail. Ah, it works quite nicely. Fantastic. So you can actually sort of look around and see. Okay, now we have a problem. Here we go. Okay, so what you'll see down the one side of the map is that it's obviously a map of a typical community anywhere in South Africa or anywhere in the world. And it's filled with different kinds of people. So on the one side, we talk about who these different kinds of people are. We have children and young adults and pregnant birth mothers and parents and grandparents and teachers and community members and traditional and spiritual healers and counselors and doctors and nurses and police. And you'll see I put the sort of children on the one side, and all the way off to the other side, I've put the sex workers and the drug addicts. And I remember when I was running a workshop in London once and saying, you know, I want to try and keep the sex workers and the drug addicts far away from the children. And their response to me was, actually, that's where most of the children we deal with are actually sitting. They are the sex workers, they are the drug addicts. So, I mean, it's always, this program always reveals very kind of sobering insights into what's happening in communities around the world. The other thing you'll notice is that there are all these little icons or conversations happening around the outskirts of this community picture. And this is just a summary of all those things. Again, don't worry to look at them. It's really just trying to find icons, creating a language for child protection that's in picture format that people can engage with. So, you know, some of them are really easy, you know, pornography, just over here. Where's my little mousey? I wonder if, sorry, I've now messed that up. So let me just try that again. Come on, up you go. Okay, so there's my mouse. So things like pornography, you know, you can go XXX and people kind of know, you know, what that is. Abandonment is slightly more esoteric. You know, jail with handcuffs. But when you start talking things like culture, how do you create an icon that represents culture all around the world? And in fact, the global icon for culture is these three little dots. So we talk about culture in the context of positive stuff in a circle, but where the cultural practice is harmful, things like female genital mutilation or, you know, harmful male circumcision where children are dying of septicemia, we put it in a hazard sign. So some of the icons are obvious. Some of them you kind of have to learn and understand, and then you can explain as a facilitator with your group. So there are challenges, and we are going to go through those challenges in detail in the next exercise. So don't stress too much that you haven't seen all of them. This is just an illustration of the community map, the 4 sides of the community map. And as I say, you can print this down in as sort of, it's supposed to be A1, but you can break it down into smaller pieces. So we have hospitals, and we have birth mother homes and rehabs and abortion clinics and children's homes and places of ill repute. And we've got formal housing and we've got informal housing. We've got parks where people hang out. We've got baby homes and clinics. We have border posts. We have religious institutions, child protection organizations and social workers. We also have schools and universities and sort of rural areas where we go home, where some challenges do take place. And there's more examples of informal housing. So it's trying to really just represent a typical community anywhere in the world. Sorry, there's the last one, police stations, courts, etc. So there's the big picture. And essentially what we try and get people to do is just take these stickers and put them down into each of these spaces. Now, if you don't have the poster, what you can also do is just project this high resolution picture onto a whiteboard and then just use colored whiteboard markers just to circle the challenges that you've seen in your community. The other really interesting research I saw was from the States, where they basically said if you can get children who've experienced abuse or observed abuse or neglect or any of those challenges on the weekend, what tends to happen is those children then come into the school environment and then they enact it in the school, on the school playground. If you can get those children to try and admit that they've seen these challenges and then engage on those challenges before they actually, it was a project that they did where they actually reduced the level of violence in the schools by something like 80%. So I mean, my dream is to actually be able to put one of these posters in every single school in South Africa or around the world and have some pins where students can literally just pin where they've had a problem anonymously, and the teacher can then walk in on the Monday morning and say, okay, so today I wanted to talk about domestic violence, or I want to talk about a harmful cultural practice, or whatever it is, and they can actually then deal with those sorts of challenges. This is what this exercise looks like in practice. So this is actually run with the psychiatric unit at Tara, where they were trying to identify the kinds of challenges that were leading to challenges that they were then experiencing from a mental health and mental wellness perspective. So it's quite difficult to do this exercise online. We're going to do it in more detail in the next exercise. But really what I wanted to show you was kind of a little bit of theory behind change management and why this particular exercise of putting a poster in front of people and getting them to identify the challenges and relate them to their communities is so powerful. When we talk about change, quite a useful way of talking about it is using Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work around death and bereavement, and she really talked about the fact that we go through these, she had a number of stages, I've simplified it down dramatically, but we go through these three major changes, sort of stages of change. There's a holding on phase where we hold on to what's the past, then there's a letting go phase, and then there's a moving forward phase. And what happens is we have to go through all of those stages, and we forget that we have to go through all of those stages. So if you think about it, whether we're talking about losing someone, as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross spoke about, you know, losing someone close to you, or you're talking about the fact that you've suddenly found out that your neighbor has been abusing their child and this was happening literally right next to you, and you thought these were nice people, you're going to go through the same stages. So initially you're going to be shocked. Oh my goodness, I can't believe this happened. And there's a little line on the left-hand side of the slide that you'll see, which is confidence. So obviously confidence is very low at the bottom and very high at the top. So immediately, if you suddenly hear about some form of child abuse happening, or neglect or exploitation happening in your community, initially you'll be very shocked. What then tends to happen is we go straight into denial. Well, maybe they're making up stories, you know, children, they make up stories all the time, you know, they're you know, and the kinds of things that happen. Then unfortunately, more evidence starts coming to light, and we get into the space of awareness. And finally, we get to this point, often other people step forward and say, it also happened to me. And we get to this place of acceptance. Now, acceptance is incredibly positive, because we basically are saying, all right, we've accepted and we're letting go of the past and we're ready to move forward. The only problem is, you'll notice your confidence levels are incredibly low. So you feel terrible. This has been happening right next door to me and I didn't even know. I knew that person. I thought they were a good person. I should have said something, and so on. As quickly as possible, we want to move people into understanding, and then trying to test new ways of doing things, and eventually to move forward. And, you know, we always show that moving forward, you'll be in a better space because the process of change is positive. The whole courage process has been designed around this holding on, letting go, moving forward. And that first exercise we've just done, if you think about it, we started with our child protection vision. But the first thing you get people to do is to actually put stickers down on a map that says, this is happening in my community. And what that immediately does is get them to be aware and to accept and to let go. So yes, it's happening in my community. Now we need to find solutions. So it's an incredibly powerful exercise if you can do it in person, or as I say, you know, projecting it up onto a wall. I need to think carefully about how we do it in the context of an online solution. But we are going to go into each of those challenges now. The next exercises that we're going to move forward and are all about, so the exercise we're going to do now is about building understanding and developing strategies for change. And then we really want to build partnerships and kind of really pull together our action plan of how to move forward. So it's really designed around getting people over this hurdle of saying, oh my God, I can't believe, shock and denial, I can't believe this is happening. And having worked in the child protection community for the last 10 years now, shock and denial is a very regular emotion that I come across. You know, take something like child abandonment, which is obviously my area of focus in my master's. You know, I'm still arguing with government to try and get them to actually measure how many children are being abandoned. And they're saying, well, is abandonment really a problem? And yet every day I get 3 or 4 articles of children who've been abandoned on the streets of South Africa or in and around South Africa. So that whole shock and denial, we've got to try and get people past it. So that was more illustrative. The next exercise is going to be far more interactive. So we're back on using your note paper, I'm hoping, and your pen. And what this is about is saying, let's go through each of these child protection challenges, understand what they are, and try and understand what the priority is in our community, because otherwise everything is a big problem and it's just too much for us to get our heads around. So for this, we use, it's actually a little purple pack of child protection challenges, and these little cards, just to show you, they kind of look like, whoopsie, they sort of look like that. They've got a picture and an icon and an explanation on the back. But don't worry, I'm also going to show it to you in a presentation format so that you can actually work with each of these cards. And then hopefully there'll also be a video in the near future. Okay, so what you're going to do on your little pad of paper in front of you is you're going to create 4 columns. And the 4 columns are going to say things like high priority, medium priority, low priority, or these challenges don't exist. So you can just put a little cross. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through every one of these child protection challenges, and we're going to just quickly understand what they are. And then all I want you to do is just to put them into, just write them down into one of the columns. So they're either a big problem in your community, or they're sort of not, I mean, they're there, but they're not a massive issue at the moment, either because they're not having a massive impact, or because it just doesn't happen that often, or they really are kind of, you hear about it, but it's not really a big challenge, or you actually haven't heard about this in the context of your community. You've never seen this, and therefore you're unfamiliar with it. The one I'm most interested in is the high priority challenges. So if we go through and it's sort of medium, low, or doesn't exist, then don't worry too much about writing it down. We're really trying to put together a sort of a top 10 of issues, or a top 3 of issues that we want to try and address within your community that you're talking about. So this really relates to the knowledge and insight component of that personal empowerment. So before we can solve problems, we need to know what those problems are. Back to my issue with social development, not wanting to measure child abandonment in this country, you know, we don't even know the scope of the problem. It's going to make it really tough to try and solve it. So the kinds of questions that we're going to ask is, we're going to look at each of these child protection challenges and try and understand them. And then we're going to place them into these 4 different piles, or write them down into the 4 different columns, and to try and get an understanding of just what are the major issues happening in your community. So, ooh, I've spelled something wrong there. Yes, no, that's definitely a typo. I'll fix that. So high priority, medium priority, low priority, or doesn't exist. I'm going to show you these various challenges, and just to explain the reason why I've ordered them in a particular way is what you tend to see when you're dealing in the world of child protection is that certain things happen at certain stages. If you remember when I talked about segmenting this world, I talked about when is it happening. And these are basically, you know, there's the in utero stage, it's when the child is a baby or a toddler or a child or a tween, a younger teen, an older teen, or a young adult. I take them all the way up to 21 because in my view, children should be looked after all the way up until that stage, but obviously 18 is the official sort of number. And at various stages, certain things are happening to these children. So we're now going to go through each of these challenges, and all I want you to do is just put them into a column. Is this a big problem in your community, a medium problem, a low problem, or actually you've never heard of it, it doesn't exist? So let's start right at the beginning, and let's talk about drug and alcohol abuse in utero. On the back of the card, it explains things like, this is when you get things like fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. It's when there's high levels of ignorance around the impact of alcohol on the child. There's often no care and protection. It's a violation of the child's rights, and it can, obviously, it does lead to a mental disability that can't be fixed. So the hippocampus is smaller of the child, so they have brain damage. So again, think about this one. I'm not going to go into detail like this on all of them. This one I'm going to go, from here on I'm going to go quite quickly, but this is the first one, drug and alcohol abuse in utero. I know if you're living in the Western Cape and you're working in townships around there, this becomes quite a big issue, and place that into high, medium, low, or doesn't exist. Late termination of pregnancy. This is where somebody is, it's referred to as concealment of birth. They basically terminate their child in the 3rd trimester. And often those children survive. Again, I'm going to go through quickly, so we're just going to literally zip through them. But of course, you can go back and you can have a look at this, and when you're running the workshops yourselves, you can spend a whole day going through these and prioritizing them as a community. HIV mother to baby, HIV mother or mother to baby HIV transmission, orphans, I think that's relevant to all South Africans. Abandonment, have you seen abandonment in your community? It could be safe or unsafe. So safe is like in hospitals, unsafe is in a toilet or at a taxi rank or something like that. No primary love or attachment. So this is often where there's huge amounts of neglect, and the child has not attached to any primary caregivers. It often happens in the context of children's homes. No registration or identity. So this is a big challenge in the child protection world, especially if a child has been abandoned. Our biggest challenge is trying to get them a birth certificate so that we can actually just get them into the child protection system. So if you were working in the child protection community, lacking registration or identity is a big issue. But immediately I'm thinking we're going into exams now, and I remember that dreadful story last year of the matriculant who committed suicide because they were told they couldn't write their exams as they didn't have a valid South African identity documentation. They'd never had one. So, I mean, it's relevant across the board. No belonging to a family or community. So, you know, no registration, no family, no community, often around refugees, no cultural roots. Child trafficking. Child trafficking looks a little bit different in South Africa to our sort of vision of, you know, people taking young girls into the sex trade and so on. Often trafficking happens in the context of border posts, people trying to get across the borders and so on. It's not taking children out of the country, it's actually children coming into the country is often where we see this happening. Illegal adoption also falls into the space where children are just handed over to someone as their child. No safety and security. This often happens where children just feel insecure. It happens in the context of natural disasters where they've been trafficked, orphaned, abandoned, they have no registration and they're not being cared for. Poor nutrition. So yes, it's about hunger. It's also about obesity or not having a balanced diet. I know the 100 Days program that's been run out of UCT is looking a lot at this and looking at how nutrition impacts on a child's future possibilities. No or poor healthcare. Obviously, this is about having no access to healthcare, but also using other forms of healthcare which may be harmful to the child. Some traditional medicines are problematic. Poverty and inequality. No food, no home, no care, discrimination. This is very structural stuff. Physical abuse. There's a whole definition of what physical abuse means, and it goes beyond just hitting a child. It goes to things like excessively shaking a child, which can give them brain damage, domestic violence, and so on. Murder or attempted murder. I'm hoping you're putting these into your columns. Neglect, where children are neglected. No food, no healthcare, exposure to drugs or alcohol, no hygiene, no education, no supervision, etc. Emotional abuse. Just taking my timing. I need to speed up a little bit. Accusations of witchcraft. Huge issue up in West Africa. Children being accused of witchcraft and then neglected to death. Sexual abuse and rape. No schooling or education. No play and recreation. No personal development. No support for special needs challenges. Child labor. Corporal punishment. And I'm going very fast. I'm hoping you just pick out the ones that are most relevant to you. Bullying. Bullying happening in the home, happening in communities, happening especially in schools, and obviously the new introduction of cyberbullying through social media. Abuse of children with disabilities, they tend to be sort of at risk in our communities. Commercial sexual exploitation, virginity testing, female genital mutilation and circumcision, harmful male circumcision. So this is not about male circumcision, it's about harmful male circumcision where the circumcision is not managed appropriately. And you know, we have around 300 boys dying every year in South Africa. Harmful cultural practices in general. There's a few issues here. My awful one, body parts used for harmful traditional medicine. I hate to tell you, but this comes up in most workshops in South Africa. Child-headed households, street children, unaccompanied minors and refugees, child marriage. We see child marriage happening a lot in the Eastern Cape now, in KZN and in Limpopo. Abuse in the justice care system. So you go into the justice care system or the foster care system or the legal system and you then are abused. Discrimination, access to justice or legal protection, violence against sexual minorities, exposure to gangsterism, again, a big Western Cape issue, but more and more happening in Johannesburg, self-harming and suicide, addiction, teen pregnancy, stigma and abuse of pregnant mothers, social unrest, violence, crime, radicalization and terrorism. So I said this was a global issue, a global program. This was one of the newer ones that I added to the mix. No freedom or respect, and that's the end of it. So I'm hoping all I want for you to do is just to make a list of your high priority cards. And whilst I'm talking through, because we're now moving into the next exercise where we're going to have to just identify, I just want you to pick for you what the most important challenges that you'd like to deal with, that you'd like to address. So just pick one challenge and then we're going to use that in the next exercise. But what you can do is you can actually create a list of sort of from 1 to 10 or 1 to 5. And now at least you've got an understanding of what those challenges are. Whilst you are working out your most important challenge, I just wanted to show you what this exercise looks like. Again, I've done quite a lot of work. I think this was at at Baragwanath. So in the sort of health, mental health space. And here you can see the ladies just putting them into the different piles. I ran a workshop with a whole bunch of children, about 150 children from various schools across Diepsloot. And at the end of the program, I was asked, the children wanted to thank me for, these were teenagers, wanted to thank me for the program. And the one young man at the back, one of the young men at the back stood up and he said, Dee, thank you for bringing us this program. People are always coming to our township, coming to Diepsloot and saying, what's actually happening in your township? And, you know, what are some of the problems? And we don't even have the language to explain to them what's happening. And what you've given us now is a language to actually explain what's happening to us in our communities, which really kind of hit me in terms of, you know, before we can start talking about stuff and solving stuff, we actually just have to have a language that we can use to explain what these different challenges are. So that's the value of this particular exercise. Right, so I'm hoping me waffling on, you've got one particular challenge that you want to try and get on top of. And really what we want to do now is try and understand what's driving that particular challenge. How does it show up in your community? And how can you then use that sort of, if that's about disempowerment and breathing out, how can we breathe in an empowered solution into our community? So this is what it kind of looks like. You've got those 7 areas of disempowerment, and we want to flip those cards and say, well, how do we then, if for instance, something is being driven by abuse, how do we build a solution using love? Or if this is about ignorance and a lack of knowledge, how do we then build knowledge around this challenge to actually change behavior? There's a number of different materials that you can use. You can use the cards. There's a big poster that you can use. Obviously, I'm going to take you through the presentation, and there'll be a video soon enough. And this is really talking about that whole idea of, you know, really focusing on abundance to try and solve these problems, as opposed to, you know, what happens so often in our communities. I saw it happened last week again. Somebody is accused within the community of doing something terrible like raping a child, and the community solution is sort of vigilantism, and the person is killed. And obviously that's massively problematic because you haven't solved a problem there. You've just created more problems because, again, we're not just talking about victims, we're talking about perpetrators. We're not just talking about children, we're talking about the people who are damaged enough to enact violence against children. So we're going to start with our high priority cards, and I just want you to pick one of them. And we're literally going to go through a 3-step approach. We're going to try and link it to a disempowerment driver, and then you're going to try and link it to an empowerment driver. That's all we're going to do today. Again, you can spend a whole day doing this with your community, or an hour, or however long you have to do it. And what your answer should look like is, you kind of, I always start at the bottom because that's where the problem is. And then you want to identify. So at the bottom, have a think about the challenge. Say you've chosen teenage pregnancy. How does that show up in your community? You want to try and make it as relevant as possible. You know, what's actually happening? Why, you know, it could be about, you know, sugar daddies. It could be about just lack of access to birth control, etc., etc. How does this challenge show up in your community? Then I want you to think about, what do you think the disempowerment driver is? And I'm going to take you through all of those in detail, but describe it in the context of your community. And then finally, how do you then flip the card? So then look at the opposite empowerment driver and say, okay, so how are we going to solve this problem? Okay, so here we are. This is how we're going to, oh, no, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, so I'm hoping each of you have got a problem in front of you. And what I'm going to do now is, I've actually realized I've probably presented these wrong because I've done empowerment, disempowerment to empowerment. It'll make sense when I start presenting it. It probably would have been easy if I'd just gone through all of the disempowerment drivers and then all of the empowerment drivers, but I wanted to show you the flip. So that's how this presentation is structured. So have a think about your challenge and ask yourself, has this problem been driven by just violence and inequality? A good point to note is often one problem has got a number of disempowerment drivers. What you want to try and identify is what's the key driver, because that will really signify your solution. But you're welcome to have a number of disempowerment drivers and a number of empowerment solutions. That's absolutely, the whole point of courage is, remember Lego, you can structure it however you want, use the material how you want. So is your challenge driven by violence and inequality? Has there been a breakdown in the rules of society, anarchy, fear, and survival? It's often the issues like social unrest, violence, poverty and inequality, war, discrimination, conflicting beliefs. These are all issues of violence and inequality. If we were to flip that card, the solution would be around values. So building values and a belief set, building safety and security, providing the basics for families, bringing in law and order, equality, knowing right from wrong, and societal leadership. So where you've got absolute anarchy, what you want to try and do is say, well, what's most important to us? How do we build a solution here? The next one is exploitation. So no partnership or working together, often issues around child trafficking, child labor, prostitution, pornography, broken families and communities, no trust and respect, and corruption and abuse of power. We would solve it through partnership. So where there's no partnership, how do we build partnerships? Good communication, shared values, mutual respect and trust. The next one obviously is your challenge built by low self-esteem? We often see this in the context of gangsterism and, all the things that drive low self-esteem, no personal identity, no choice, shaming, etc. And that then creates low self-esteem. And obviously we need to build high self-esteem. So build strong personal identities, help people make decisions, get them to care for each other, give them focus and direction, help them to achieve something, and build personal responsibility. Is your challenge driven by abuse, hate, anger, fear, resentment, using violence to solve conflicts? I remember running a workshop actually up towards Middelburg, and a father had gone to jail because his daughter had spent the night out with her boyfriend, and when she came home he beat her so badly she ended up in hospital for a month. And when he was asked, why did you do this, he said, I did this because I love her. And it was really shocking because essentially he's using violence to solve conflict. And in fact, the solution is love. But the problem is what happens when your language of love is violence? So it does get complicated. And these are the kinds of issues. Remember, this is just to start conversations in communities. So sometimes it doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but it starts you in the process of solving the problem because you start having the right conversation. So this is about using love to solve conflict, empathy, peace, families, support. Is this challenge driven by apathy and addiction? No direction, conformity, no leadership, helpless and hopeless? How do we help this? How do we change the solution with vision, giving them direction, focus, choice, freedom, leadership, innovation? Ignorance, is this challenge driven by a lack of information or understanding, no insight, no monitoring and measurement, back to my child abandonment issue, possibly harmful cultural practices and corruption? And therefore the answer to that is, how do we use knowledge? And then finally, neglect, no healthcare, no support, no nothing. And therefore, how do we then create action, build plans, create sustainability, deliver services? And essentially what you want to do is you want to map your challenges to those drivers. And what you tend to see in communities is certain themes come through. So, I mean, I've done a lot of workshops in the sort of townships heading out of Cape Town on the N2, and sort of not so much Lange, but Khayelitsha, Blue Downs, Blackie Fontaine, and so on. And, there's kind of key themes come through. There's an enormous amount in those spaces of gangsterism, so low self-esteem. There's an enormous amount of addiction, drug addiction, and then there's just too many guns. So there's a huge amount of violence happening. And then you can start to try and say, okay, well, how do we solve those problems? Because now we need to move to the next level and saying, okay, well, if you, in context, if you've got, apathy and addiction, we need to start giving the kids vision. If you've got low self-esteem, how do we start building high self-esteem? If you've got violence, how do we build values? So it's really about saying the actual exercise is identify the disempowerment drivers, identify the problems, map them to the purple cards, the disempowerment drivers, and then finally to the empowerment drivers, and build your solution, which is based on that. So I'm hoping if you've got your problem, have a think, I'm going to go back to this slide, have a think about what you think the key challenge is, and then just link it to an empowerment driver. So do the breathing out, which is the disempowerment stuff, and then do the breathing in. It's also important to remember that any one of, I've given some examples here, but any one of these challenges could map to any one of these disempowerment drivers. If you take something like teenage pregnancy, it can be, I mean, I've had workshops where it's due to just general violence and inequality. There's just too much violence happening in the community, and young girls become the sort of cannon fodder for that. Exploitation, you know, they fall pregnant because they are, you know, got a sugar daddy and he didn't want me to use birth control. Low self-esteem, you know, if you really love me, you would have sex with me, okay. Abuse, just sexual abuse. You know, binge drinking is a massive challenge with young women. You know, kind of wake up the next morning and something bad has happened. Just not knowing, when I was doing my research around child abandonment, how many young girls came to me, specifically in Alex. I was doing a lot of work in Alex. I didn't know how you actually make a baby. I thought if I stopped having sex in time, then I wouldn't actually make a baby. So kind of real misunderstanding around, you know, conception. And then obviously neglect, you know, no one's actually explained to this young woman how babies are made, access to birth control, etc. So any challenge can have any driver. And again, it's like Lego, you kind of mix them up and you try and understand in the context of your community what's actually happening. So I just wanted to quickly, whilst you're working through that 3-step approach with your problem to yellow card to blue card to or purple card to white card and solution, just to show you, this is often what it looks like in the workshops. They've identified these are just their high priority cards. I obviously work a lot with child protection officers, so they got lots of issues. Hopefully if you're working in a community, there's not quite so many, but unfortunately South Africa does have the lion's share of child protection challenges, and there they are mapping them to the blue cards and then to the white. This was actually a workshop I ran with those young kids in the inner city, and this was heartbreaking. It was from 5 different schools in the inner city, and they'd identified that corporal punishment and abuse in the school was terrible. And so they had to come up with a campaign. They wanted to come up with a campaign to try and get their teachers to actually care more for them. I mean, there were incidents of the teacher literally beating them with a broomstick and stuff like that. So their problem was the teachers abused the learners verbally, in fact, and physically, that they then understood, that they kind of explained the driver in their own words. And they then created a campaign called Love Your Teacher and Your Teacher Will Love You. So if we're more loving towards our teachers, we will show them the right behaviors, which is obviously devastating. But in many instances, you do see children actually driving the solutions to a better future. Right, so that was, we've visioned a future, we've acknowledged that there are problems, and then we've understood what those problems are, we've prioritized those problems, and we've tried to map them from disempowered to empowered. At this stage, I often feel it's really important to show people what do you actually need to do if you've seen a child who's been abused or neglected or exploited. So I have a few of these running posters, and when I send this presentation to you, you'll see this one deals with what is child protection and safeguarding. But there are presentations on sex education and conception and pregnancy awareness, option counseling for crisis pregnancy. What do you do if you find an abandoned child in your community? What is the process of adoption? And so on. So there are a few others, mostly from my time in the world of kind of crisis pregnancy. But this one is particularly about what happens if you see abuse or neglect or exploitation in your community. What are the steps you need to take? Again, there's a map, a big poster. I won't show you, but you know what to expect. There's hopefully a video, and I'm going to take you through the presentation. And what we do here is we really try and, first of all, just take them through the process. But to make it relevant to their community, what you can do is ask them to try and, as you go through the process, to link the process they're seeing to the map that you've got on the table in front of them, so that they can actually say, okay, if this happens, I must go and speak to so-and-so who works at the school or whatever. So they make direct links to their community. So the first is obviously you would have observed a child protection challenge, whether it's abandonment or neglect or child abuse, and we just talked through what all the different kinds of child abuse are, or exploitation. So have you seen any of these issues? And the first thing you have to do is to report it to the issue to a child protection officer. And that could be a nurse or a doctor or a social worker or a police officer or a principal or a teacher or a spiritual advisor, or just some adult in your community that can help, that is outside of the challenge. And that's obviously, it poses its own issues because children often just don't have access to someone to talk to. The two things will happen at that point. The first thing that will happen is whoever contacts the police and the social workers, there will be an investigation and they will go and check out what's going on. So obviously in this instance here, we've got parents who are very poor and they're addicted to drugs or alcohol, and they've either neglected or abused their child. The other thing that will happen is if the child is at risk, the child must be removed from that environment. So they will be put into a temporary safe care solution, and that could be, it's a legal process. So we've got a little judge in the corner there. It'll be done by a social worker. There's legal documentation, and the child will either be put into a children's home or a baby's home or into foster care, but they will be taken out of their home environment because it's dangerous, or wherever the environment is. At that point, a decision needs to be made. Is this going to be statutory or non-statutory intervention? So essentially, is there evidence that we need to take this, it's a criminal matter, and we need to take it to court? And before we can do that, we need to prepare both the child and the parents. So there's always preparation that happens and counseling that happens before. And at that point, we decide, you know, are we going to just try and reunify this child, or are we going to go to the way of the courts? So the one option is, listen, actually, we just need to reunify this child and give the parents some support. They need an identity document, or they need a grant, or we need to just build the family again and do family preservation work. However, if we go to court, there could be a legal finding that says, hang on a second, there's big problems here and we need to remove the children permanently. So at that court appearance, there will be a legal finding, and either the child is reunified, and again, that support happens, or the child is removed from care. There's two things that could happen here. Either the child is just removed from care and the parents are found to be sort of unable to look after children. Or we can actually, I was pausing because in America, if that finding is found against you, you will never be able to look after or have a child again in your care. So even if you give birth to another child, the child will be removed from your care. So it is significant. That doesn't happen in South Africa. And then if there's actual criminal neglect or abuse or exploitation, we then link to the criminal justice system, and charges are brought against the parents or the abusers. If the children are removed, we then need to look at an alternative care plan, and there's 4 alternatives here. We can either look at kinship care, and there are various challenges associated with that. You know, in South Africa, we see it all the time where grandparents are looking after a number of children, and that creates enormous amount of stress in their lives. But it does mean that the child is connected to their family. It does often put strain on their resources, but they can access a foster care grant. From the child's point of view, obviously from a cultural point of view, they're connected to their family, but often there are challenges around role reversal, where you're being brought up by your grandparents, possibly with your mother as your sibling, and so on. Another alternative is foster care. In my program, I'm very anti what I call temporary solutions. So you'll see I refer to this as a temporary solution. In the rest of the world, it is a temporary solution. In South Africa, we have children aging out of foster care at the age of 18 all the time, but there are challenges. Sorry, I'm just seeing there's a note here. The next one is residential care. I'm very anti this. Children who grow up in institutions, in children's homes, they have challenges because of issues of lack of attachment and not feeling like they belong. And then, of course, there's adoption, which has positives and negatives. So on the positive side, yes, you get a family and you're connected and so on, and you're supported. However, there are some cultural challenges, which, as I say, I wrote a whole thesis on, so you're welcome to read that. But it's always important with each of these options to understand what is available. So the most important thing to do is that you speak up. I always say to the people who are part of my workshops, you know, this is the process you need to follow. But the step one is just saying something's wrong here. We need to actually deal with this, because often we see problems and we don't speak up. I didn't have a picture of anyone actually following, but this was interestingly a workshop I ran in Everton in the Sedibeng region, where communities, we were trying to introduce the concept with social development, the concept of adoption. And actually they were mapping out the process of adoption in the context of their communities, which was really fascinating, because there was an enormous amount of illegal adoption taking place where children would just be placed into other people's care. So we've got about 20 minutes left. That was just showing you the process. There's nothing to do in terms of exercise other than take it in. The next, there's 3 more exercises to go, and I don't have time to go through all of them in detail, so we're going to go through them quite quickly. But I just want you to just to be familiar with them. The first is just to understand that no man is an ocean. We can't solve these child protection challenges on our own. And so the key in these workshops is to get people to identify who are all the other people that they can engage with to actually solve these problems. And so it's really about partnership and collaboration. We use the map again, this time with different colored stickers, usually green stickers, and we identify who our partners are. I'm going to try and do it online now. So it's a two-step approach. First of all, we identify who the different partners are, and then we actually say, well, how do we want to work with these people? Because often relationships in the child protection community are extremely fraught. Everyone sort of thinks that they are doing the best they can and no one else is supporting them. So social workers get angry with police officers, you get angry with community members, you get angry with the courts, you get angry with the Department of Social Development, and everyone seems to be fighting. So it's a really powerful, it's probably the most powerful exercise I do in my workshops, is just getting people to identify who are the people I should be working with and what should that relationship look like. So it's, this is what the output looks like. So for each of the partners, you then identify who your partner is, what are your shared vision, values, and objectives. That's at the bottom is obviously you. And you want to understand in that relationship, what do I need to give to the relationship and what do I want to get from that relationship? So step one is just saying, well, and again, if we go into, I'm not going to zoom in, but if we go into, let me just see if I've, okay. Yeah, if we go into, I'm going to have to go up there. If we go into that map and we kind of blow it up and say, well, who do I partner with? You might say, okay, well, I'm actually, at the university and I'm a lecturer, and I need to, if I want to try and solve child protection problems here, I probably want to just understand what our students' rights are. So I'd go and speak to the department. I might want to make sure that I've got a connection to the local police station, because if problems happen, I want to be able to call them. I want to know, I want to have some social workers on call. There might be some religious institutions that I can reach out to who can provide services and support on campus. You know, who else do I want to connect with? Maybe the local clinic or hospital, and so on. So step one is, let's just identify who those different people are. And they literally just stick stickers onto each of those individuals. And then they need to spend time actually building these win-win solutions. So just in terms of timing, I've got us at 11, is it 11:42, everyone? You're all happy with that? We've got about 15 minutes to go. We don't really have time to do this exercise, but coming out of this workshop, what I want you to do is just to maybe identify, if you've identified some challenges, just maybe one or two people who you could work with, and then just sit down and say, well, what can I do to help this particular individual to solve the problem, and what can they do for me? This was actually, this was the workshop I ran at, what's it called, in Free State, University of Free State. These are actually final year social work master's graduates, and Courage is now part of their practical course as to how they do social work. So they have to go and take Courage and run it in their communities, and then come back and report back on that as one of their projects. This is again the Seychelles example, and the only reason why I use this, so they've identified, what we did was, once we'd identified all our partners, we stuck those people together in the room. And what you see here is the person on the right, the lady in the black and white top, she was in charge of sort of orphans and kind of the adoption process, and the lady on the left was part of government and registering children and registering adoptions and so on, and they hated each other. And so they walked into the workshop and they literally were fighting with each other, and we got them to sit down and just ask each other, well, what do I need from you, and then vice versa, and what are we trying to achieve here together? And they ended up actually with big smiles on their faces, and new friendships were made. So I mean, sometimes that doesn't happen, but it is heartwarming when people actually sit down and think, not just what I want from you, but how can we work positively together? So that's the partnership exercise. There's two more things to do. One is looking at the values that will drive change, and I really want us to do this exercise, so I'm going to go super fast through this. And then the last one is really just action planning. And all I really want from everyone is just to think of one thing you'll do differently now that you've gone through this courage process. So very quickly, if we have rights as children and as human beings, what are our responsibilities? Because if we link our rights to our responsibilities, what tends to emerge is is a value that says, okay, well, if I have a right to education and my responsibility is to learn hard, what is the value? Well, I value learning. And that then becomes something important that influences my behavior. So very quickly, I've got some fun cards that we go through. And normally what I do is we mix them up, and the kids or the adults or whoever have to try and match the human rights card, there's a human right card, to a human responsibility card. And we have all sorts of fun seeing who can do it fastest. I haven't been able to do that online, but what I have done is I've just given you a few seconds to think about what your responsibility is. So I'm going to go through each of these rights. There's 20 of them. And I just want you to have a quick think, what would if this is my right, what would my responsibility be? And then I'm going to give you the answer. So I'm literally going to just count down 5 seconds, and then I'm going to give you the answer. So they're the cards, and obviously I'm presenting to you. And this is about having rights and responsibilities is really about building your self-esteem and knowing that you can take action and personal responsibility. So if these are our rights, so the first right is we have a right to special needs support. If I have special needs support, what is my responsibility? Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So if you want to, you can write it down or you can type it into the message box, and we'll see who's quickest with these. But now we've gone through our 5 seconds. So if I have a right or special needs support, my responsibility is to accept and embrace difference. Now, these are by no means, I want to just confirm, these aren't by no means dictated to us. This was me brainstorming what would I think my responsibility is based on this right. And it's quite a tough exercise to do. So I actually would really value, if you've got a different perspective of what you think your responsibility would be, that you share that perspective in the chat group. It would be awesome to see. Next one, if you have a right to legal protection and justice, what would your human responsibility be? I'm going to hold up my fingers. Right, and we're moving on to the answer. To abide by the law with honesty and integrity. If I have a right to health, what would my responsibility be? I'm just going to count it in my head now. Give you 5 seconds. So a right to health would imply that I must live a healthy life. It's great to get access to health, but I must also try and be as healthy as possible. If I have a right to safety and security, what would my responsibility be? I think your responsibility would be to respect the safety and security of others. So don't infringe on others' safety and security. If I have a right to honor, respect, and dignity, my responsibility would to honor and respect the dignity of others. If I have a right to privacy, my responsibility would be to respect the privacy of others. A right to family, to support and contribute towards your family. So to actually help build your family and be part of that family. If I have a right to registration of a name, identity, and nationality, my responsibility would be to respect the name, identity, and nationality of others. So yeah, identity fraud is not okay. If I have a right to love, care, and protection, I should love, care, and protect others. I'll quickly speed up a little bit. If I have a right to education, I've already spoken to you about this. So my responsibility, I have a right to education, is to learn and work hard at your studies. If I have a right to leisure and recreation, I should live an active and healthy life as much as I can. If I have a right to community and belonging, I should participate actively in my community and help to build my community. If I have a right to freedom of thought, expression, association, and religion, I should respect the rights of to freedom and of thought, of expression, and association and religion of others. So with all the protests happening in South Africa at the moment, this is a particularly important one. If I have a right to cultural roots, I should ensure that my culture does not infringe on the rights of others. And I should also respect the culture and rights of the culture of other people. If I have a right to a full and happy life, I must take responsibility for my life and for the choices that I make. If I have a right to a unique identity, I should respect the unique identity of others. If I have a right to physical, mental, social, and emotional development, I should develop my own body, mind, emotions, and social skills. So I have a responsibility to work on those capacities myself. Moral development is to develop a personal value system. What's important to me? What do I believe in? Which is what we're going to have a quick think about now. If I have a right to life, I should respect the lives of others, both animal and human. And if I have a right to a healthy planet, so this is for the environmentalists and vegans, I must respect and care for the environment myself. So that's really the different values, the rights versus responsibilities. But, and that really should work as stimulus to say, okay, so I want us to just quickly go back to our vision and what we said, the kind of world we want to achieve for our children. You'll see it's now on the left of the screen. I just want you to pick 2 or 3 values that you think will help you to achieve that vision. Just 2 or 3 words, just put them on the right-hand side and say, well, these are the 2 or 3 values that will actually help me achieve that vision. So take a second or 2 and just think that through. Whilst you're doing that, I'm just going to show you what this exercise looks like in real life. This is actually many years ago, my daughter, when I first got the cards, trying to match the rights to responsibilities with her au pair. So just linking the 2 together. This is again from that workshop that I ran in the inner city, moving on from matching rights to responsibilities. These were the children just identifying the key values that they would need to believe in to make their vision a reality in their community. So I'm hoping you've had a second just to write down 1, 2, or 3 things that you really need to value to help you achieve your vision. We've got about 5 minutes to go, just over 5 minutes to go. We're at the last exercise, and this is really about saying, so now that you understand the importance of child protection, what will you do differently? And hopefully we've broken it down into like really simple step-by-step approach to help you think about very practical things that you can do. I normally ask this question threefold. I ask, from today, what will you stop doing? From today, what will you start doing? And from today, what will you continue doing? This is an old trick in change management. When you go in and try and help people to sort of pivot towards a new vision or something, what you want to try and explain to them is that this is not about throwing everything out, the baby out of the bathwater. This is actually about saying, you might need to do some new things. You might need to stop doing some of the things you were doing, but there's a whole bunch of stuff you were already doing that you need to keep doing. And so you don't want to get rid of that stuff. It's really about building on the good stuff that you are doing as an individual, as a community, or as an organization. So this is about presence and action in terms of empowerment drivers. And I guess I really just, I mean, you can absolutely make a list of all the things you want to stop, start, or continue doing. But what I'd love to see in the chat box is just one thing that you will do now that, based on having been in this workshop, just share with me just something that you know, maybe has changed your perspective, and or just one thing you want to do differently. And whilst you're typing those in, I just want to quickly take you through a couple more issues. So, you know, that's how you would respond. This was another workshop actually with a creative group that I ran with a whole bunch of kids. And the action plan was actually a little booklet that they made, which consisted of their own personal vision, their own personal identity. They created a personal crest for themselves, and then they had a personal action plan, which they then signed and dated. So it was just quite a fun way of just bringing it to life. If you're part of a child protection organization, you might have the responsibility of actually developing a proper strategic plan. So really, this is just showing you a typical strategic plan, which should really have an overarching vision and values, which is what you've done. It should identify what you want to achieve and also what the reality is that you're dealing with. So that's effectively called a gap analysis. So what the reality is in your community versus what you'd want to try and achieve. You would need to identify and set priorities or strategic objectives. You'd create an action plan, all of which you've done as part of this process, and a partnership plan. So identifying the partners you want to work with and how you're going to work with them. And then you would develop an implementation plan and then obviously review it quarterly or annually or however you work. So these are just some of, as part of the presentation, this was just some of the templates. If you just complete these templates, you've actually got your strategy. So this one talks to our vision versus our values. Oops, there's another typo. Sorry, I'm dyslexic. I will fix that. But vision versus values. You might want to create a chart that shows your ranking, high, medium, or low, or doesn't exist, or even give it a numerical value from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 of each of these challenges, because obviously you can return to this over time and it becomes an effective measure. If you do this with other people in your community or, other people in your community or other people as part of your organization, you can actually then start to get a view on which challenges are getting worse and which challenges are getting improved, and try and understand the context. Another interesting one is to compare, this was in Zambia, they used this courage they did workshops with the community, and then they did workshops with government service delivery people, and they compared the two, and it was actually quite different in terms of what the community thought the problems were versus what the government and social workers thought the problems were. These are your priorities. This is just a good tool. What impact, if I solve this problem, what impact will it have on my community, and how difficult will it be to implement or solve? There's an old strategy tool to actually try and work out short-term, medium-term, and long-term problems. A template for listing your problems to disempowerment drivers and then empowerment drivers. A template for putting together your solutions. An overview of your partnership plan, your win-win partnership strategies. And then this is just a typical kind of, if you've got a priority, what is it and why am I doing it? How would I measure it? Sorry, the bottom here there is gone, but it should say who's responsible, when should it be delivered, and how am I going to do it? I'll fix that. And then just the action plan, stop, start, continue. And that's the end of the program. So have exactly 3 minutes until everything comes to an end. I'm happy to stick around for a little bit longer, but I think I've got my email somewhere here. Oh no, I think it's only at the end. Sorry, these are the other presentations around the different processes, which will be part of the presentation I send you. But just to remind you, my email address is dee@bobi.coza. And if you send me your contact details, I will send you a Dropbox of this presentation. But if you just go to couragechildprotection.com, all of this information is there for you to download, and this presentation will be on there by the weekend. So you can download it from Monday. So yeah, any questions or queries? I'd love to hear them.
Hi, Dee. Thank you for a rich and full experience. I do have a question, actually. Sorry, I haven't checked for other hands. I just want to know, I'm kind of very intrigued by the idea of the children, you know, talking about making their teachers love them by showing love. And I just wondered what sort of feedback, I mean, I see that the workshop is designed to have, you know, monitoring and evaluation kind of processes, but just with a project like that, for example, I mean, do you follow up what's happened, or has anybody come back to you with any of that stuff? And just, I just wanted a kind of an example of what stuff you've seen change as a result of this process.
So often I am kind of walking into an organization, working with that organization, and they're then working in the community. So often I get follow-ups. So in that particular instance, it didn't get better. It got worse. And we had to get social workers into the schools and, you know, the normal investigation and so on. So, you know, sometimes it's really just that process poster is really quite useful in terms of empowering people to say, okay, well, we can try and solve this problem as a community, but if it escalates, then we need to take it to the next level. So yeah, I mean, in some instances, I think for me, what's most powerful is it works differently in different audiences. Among social workers, I often get the feedback that you've reminded me why I'm a social worker, and you've created instead of just putting out fires, which is what we tend to do every day, is we're now going to take a strategic approach to solving these problems, which is what they use the program for. So, and that's the audience that I've spent the most amount of time with. In the context of the Seychelles, I mean, it literally changed their whole structure of how they dealt with child protection, and they identified a number of key challenges. So the big issue in Seychelles is it's an island, there's no key ports, so they have massive challenges with drugs, and as a result with neglect. So they did 2 huge programs around just dealing with drug abuse, and then, you know, putting structures in place to help with children who, so it's, I always say courage is about a mile wide and about an inch deep. It's not there to solve each and every problem. It's just trying to bring a strategic gaze to the challenges that are happening in your community so that you can break them down to bite-sized chunks and then start eating them one bite at a time, as it were. You know, what I have done now is, you'll see everything has been put into posters, and it's actually got to the point now where, you know, people don't like running these workshops. They find them very difficult and stressful to do. But if I just put 4 posters up in the school, it's funny, the children still have the right conversation. So the poster of the community picture, they identify problems, and then the rights and needs, what should be happening to me, and then the child protection process, who can I talk to, and then the mind shift from disempowered to empowered kind of just shifts their perspective on each of those challenges. So actually my new focus now is just printing off posters, A1 posters, and sending them to schools and saying, just put these up. And I've watched that the kids just start clustering around the posters and having the right conversations. And actually, it's actually a preventative tool. So really what we want to do is just to start the conversation in communities in a very accessible way.
Thank you. That sounds great. And I think the point you make is exactly that the capacity for people to be part of the process, look at the workshops and work out what works best, means that there will be a multi-level responses. Are there any other questions from anyone? I'm conscious we've reached time.
Sorry, I didn't leave too much time.
No, that's fine.
You're most welcome to email me.
And then my second question was, the resources, are they available in multiple languages or in English?
Unfortunately, just in English with pictures, obviously. I am told it's been translated into Spanish somewhere in South America, but I've never been sent the outcome of that. Unfortunately, you know, I literally did this all under my own steam.
No. That's what I'm thinking about. What
but I have handed it out to students who've offered to translate it. I've yet to get anything back. So anyone who wants to do work on a translation, and I'll send you the material, you can give me the translation, and I'll get it designed up for you. It's easy peasy. I'd love to work with you.
That's great, thank you. Okay, it now falls on me to do 2 delightful tasks. To thank you very much, Dee, for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and this remarkable kind of process into this space. I feel like my brain is kind of filled with new things and knowledge, so thank you very much for that. Thank you to our participants for being here and for being part of this, and we hope that everybody feels the sense of a move from disempowerment to empowerment in this particular moment. So thank you very much to everyone. The other thing I would just like to remind everybody about is that this afternoon we have 2 academic sessions that we would love for you to be part of. We have a session called Loss of Breath, where Megan Wainwright, I will be talking about home oxygen therapy comparisons in South Africa and Uruguay. Leslie Swartz will be speaking about, or reading from his new book, which is explores his caring for his mother. And we have Kate Binney, whose soundscape is one of the things that feature on our new gallery. So if you haven't looked at the gallery yet, you'll get a sense of some of Kate's work there. And Lent, who's talking about breath through respiratory philosophy. Our second session this afternoon is called Suffocation, and it promises to be a very interesting session. It covers critical race theory, the university in a post-COVID-19 world, breath as public memory, and food, breath, and the Anthropocene. So a smorgasbord of a bringing together of events for our last academic panel. And then tomorrow afternoon is our second keynote, presented by Professor Jay McNaughton, who is the head of the Institute for Medical Humanities at Durham. And in fact, Durham's medical health humanities field started with a project on breath and breathlessness. So it's a kind of particularly interesting kind of reflection on that space. And her talk is entitled The Breath of Degradation, Why is Breathlessness Invisible? We also have more exciting creative works coming up. A lot of the work this week deals with ideas of caring and finding ways to care and support. So this workshop works very nicely into that space, and we really encourage everyone to have a look at those. And we're hoping, the weather in Joburg providing, that we will end this week off with a glorious rooftop concert, which, as we sadly cannot all be on the rooftop together, we will live stream by whatever means possible. So please do keep an eye out on that. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Dee, to the participants, and to Charlotte and Nolwazi, as always, for making the things happen. Okay.
And just to add about the rooftop concert is that it will be at sunset. So it's a sunset rooftop concert.
Sunset, yes.
Yeah.
Will you send out invitations for us Josie peeps?
We will post far and wide.
Awesome.
And please make sure to note that it's Johannesburg sunset, not Cape Town sunset.
Yes, exactly.
We will completely miss it.
We get that little extra time. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Okay, bye.